Thanks very much for joining us, everyone. I'm being joined by Eamonn Carey from Techstars. Thanks so much for taking some of your time out today. Really keen to kind of get into the world of accelerators, your background specifically in moving from a product role to joining an accelerator, and then just talking a little bit more about Techstars specifically, because Techstars is quite a different type of organization than kind of the typical accelerators. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool, awesome. So there seems to be an explosion of tech accelerators in recent years. Just briefly, what makes Techstars different than some of the other ones that people might have heard about?
It's almost reached a meta level at this point. Like someone announced a while ago that they were starting an accelerator for accelerators.
I heard that too, yeah.
Like we're kind of climbing to new heights of absurdity.
Exactly.
I think what makes Techstars different, I guess, I suppose we've been around for a while. So Techstars started back in 2007. So we've been doing it for quite a long time. I think everyone who does my job as an MD in Techstars has been on the other side of the table. So we've all been founders, we've all gone through, success and failure and sometimes kind of a combo of both. I think the network that we've managed to build up over the last couple of years of kind of incredible mentors and partners is one of the key parts. So I think globally, we have thousands, probably tens of thousands now of mentors who've helped companies over the last 12 years on our accelerator programs. We work with hundreds of big corporates from Barclays to Amazon to MetLife to Rakuten and lots of others. So corporates who want to engage with startups and who want to kind of get involved with the ecosystem and understand how they can better collaborate. I think the other thing that we've always kind of thought about is how do we become this worldwide network that helps entrepreneurs succeed. And so a big part of that is the accelerator programs that I'm a part of and that I run and the investment and access to the network that we provide. But I think if you go back to kind of the very early kind of inspiration stage for businesses, we run close to 1,000 startup weekend events around the world every year now in about 160 plus countries, where people come together and pitch ideas and form teams and build prototypes over 54 hours. And we run Startup Week. I just got back from Startup Week in Bilbao last week, where we had lots and lots of people from the kind of Bilbao Biscay community come together to hear talks, talk about the businesses they were starting, visit offices, and just get a feel for what's happening in their ecosystem. So I think we obviously want to help entrepreneurs succeed, we want to help companies succeed, but we've also got a really big focus on the kind of community and ecosystem around that. And so I think for us, that overall network is the real kind of secret sauce that we have.
I think, and it's interesting you say that, because obviously everyone says the network is so important, yet few actually have the track record to show that. Everyone says, oh, well, we have a huge Rolodex and you can go through all these wonderful mentors, get great advice. And the feedback that you hear from people who go through programs like that is often they're a little let down.
Yeah.
That either they don't have as strong a mentorship network as they thought. There's an expectation setting that's just way overblown. But Techstars doesn't have that kind of reputation, and yet, and you're kind of so spread around the world.
We made a deliberate decision. I think great entrepreneurs come from everywhere, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The distribution of talent and ability is not uneven. I think maybe I started my first company 15 years ago, right? And back then you had like lots and lots of amazing companies in the US on the West Coast and on the East Coast, and there was a real density of kind of guidance and advice and capital and lots of other things. And in Dublin, in Ireland, where we started, there was a little, significantly less of that. And then if you went out into other parts of the world, like we were, selling into the Middle East and spending time in Beirut or Dubai or spending time out in Korea, like there was even less access to kind of capital and mentors and people and success stories and so forth. Whereas I think now, we traveled last year's Techstars London program. We had companies from Korea, Ukraine, India, all over the map. And I travel around quite a lot at various different conferences and events, and you meet founders from every continent on earth. And nowadays everyone has access to the same Coursera courses, right? Everyone has access to the same answers on Quora. Everyone has access to people that are on Twitter, right? So I think the distribution of talent and ability has always been relatively even. To my mind, the access to kind of advice and guidance was uneven until comparatively recently. So now we're seeing amazing companies coming out of Ukraine, out of Korea, out of Africa, out of all of these kind of different markets. And from a Techstars perspective, you know, we, since quite a long time ago, have always talked about being that kind of worldwide network. And, you know, Startup Weekend is an enormous part of that. Like, it touches almost every country in the world now. But, you know, and we've expanded our accelerators. So 2007 through 2012, it was mostly in the US. And then we came to London, and then Berlin, and then Tel Aviv. Now we're in kind of Paris and Oslo and Amsterdam and Lisbon, Dubai, Singapore, you know, so we've really kind of, India, we added last year, and we've got a bunch more to come over the next little while. We just did our first space accelerator, so we're kind of going,
yeah, wow, that's cool.
Not just content with this planet.
That's right, exactly. You just need an offsite in the ISS. So just shifting back to other kind of like accelerators for a moment. What do you think about the so-called like accelerators that still ask for equity but don't provide investment? There seems to be quite a split in what people think about that, and especially if you're talking to people who either have a little business that they're thinking about going into the kind of accelerator world, they're no doubt getting all these kind of offers for that kind of stuff. So yeah, what do you think about this?
I'd always say to people, like, do your, you know, and I say to people who are thinking about doing Techstars as well, like, do your due diligence on me and do your due diligence on the accelerator. And so, or any investor, like, this is true right the way up to raising kind of growth rounds of capital. Right. I think there's a lot of people out there asking for a bunch of stuff, and there is a question mark over maybe the value that's coming back in on the far side. And I think it's incumbent on founders to talk to other alumni of those programs, and you know, we're pretty open in terms of saying, you know, how to get in touch with founders from Techstars programs, and we don't say, hey, talk to these two people who of course are going to give us a great review. It's like, go nuts, talk to anyone. So I think there's a lot of programs out there that do kind of weird, you know, whether it's they'll invest a certain amount of money and then you have to pay a fee back to the program, and you know, there's a couple of different models like that, some of which obviously are valid, right? Everyone has to make a living. But I think there has to be some sort of value exchange, and I think you have to, you know, as a founder, kind of figure out who's the person who's asking you for this equity, and what are you going to get in return. And one of the things that we did a couple of years ago is we introduced an equity back guarantee, because, you know, Techstars asked for 6% of the common stock in a company, right? And that's kind of an emotional amount of equity to give away. So, you know, to de-risk it for the founders and for any investors, we said, look, well, you go through the program and you think that wasn't worth it, or they didn't provide any value, well, then you can ask for the equity back, and we'll give it to you. And I think it's looking for those types of angles that may start to provide some clues as to kind of the value or effectiveness that you'll see from accelerators. But it's tricky. Like, you know, entrepreneurs are getting bombarded by offers from different people, and it was exactly the same. You know, when I started my first company, people will go, yeah, I'll make that intro, but I want 50% of the revenue.
Exactly.
Or like, I want to be an advisor, but I want like 8% of your company or 10% of your company for doing it. And then we kind of said, well, why? Like, what are you actually going to do for that? The kind of, you know, blank expression came on people's faces. And I think that's one of the challenges now. Is when I heard an interview with Sam Altman the other day, where he was kind of going, you know, there's 8,000 accelerators just in China, like, so who knows however many there are. You're talking about tens of thousands worldwide, and the reality is, you know, a lot of them are probably good environments and run by very well-meaning people, but the outcome and the output, you know, you've got to balance that up against you know, the equity that you're giving away. Yeah,
absolutely. So in terms of just talking a little bit about your background in from a product perspective, I first met you a couple weeks back listening to you talk, and you had this very interesting story about your time making Facebook games, and connecting that to the fundamentals that you needed to learn very quickly in order to kind of professionalize the outfit. So why is it important for people who are maybe having a relatively successful SaaS business, for example. They've been running it themselves. They now want to take it to the next level. Like, why should they be worried about nailing what you might call the fundamentals so early on? Does that make sense?
I think the challenge for a lot of companies is a lot of the stuff that you do today. It's a little bit like the butterfly effect, right? Like something that you do today echoes kind of 3 years in the future, and suddenly everything falls over. And we've met a lot of companies, whether they be B2C or B2B, who've architected their system beautifully for 10,000 users or 20,000 users, or maybe they've done it for 50,000 concurrent users. And then they raise a Series A and they had 100,000 concurrent users and the whole thing falls over, right? Yeah. So I think to the extent that it is possible, you have to start thinking about scale as early as you can, and start thinking systematically about kind of processes and plans. And this is stuff that's really, frankly, pretty alien for a lot of founders. Like, most of us who started companies did it because we wanted to not be in a process-driven environment. Or,
exactly.
Really shitty at it, right? But I think one of the advantages of an accelerator program, or a great board, or a great mentor, or a great advisor, is someone who can tell you just how to start thinking about some of the big things, like thinking about roles and responsibilities within the organization, thinking about hiring processes, thinking about technical and scaling architecture, thinking about messaging and branding and marketing and how that's going to resonate, thinking systematically about all of these things is really important, because at a certain point, the company starts to almost kind of generate its own momentum, and you're no longer fully in control of it. And if you have a month going, holy shit, like we've got to backfill all of these things, the wheels can come off the bus pretty quickly when that happens. So I think putting those structures in place early on is for me really important to think about and spend time on. And also then as you scale and you're like, you want to hire a VP of ops, or you want to hire someone who's at a relatively senior level, if they're coming into an organization where they're probably going to get paid less well than they could if they went to one of the big Facebook or Apple or whoever else, like if they come in and they see that you have at least some of your ducks in a row, it's going to be an easier yes, I think, for them to come on board. So it's all of these things that a little bit of time up front goes a long way further down the line. And it's tricky for entrepreneurs, right? Because frequently you're kind of
focus here,
blinkers on, and you can't spend time. But one of the things that we say to companies is, like, at least once a quarter, if you can, it's really important to get everyone from the company and just get out of the office, even if it's just for a half a day, and go somewhere else and talk about the company, but from a broader kind of more strategic perspective, rather than the kind of narrow, here's what we're going to do in the next hour or two. And I think the guys from Intercom did it really well. They had a post a while ago that was like, 666. So it was, 6 years is your vision, 6 months is your strategy, 6 weeks are your tactics. And it's kind of thinking about it in that way to go, okay, what are the things? Because most companies are really good at saying, this is where we are now, and this is where we want to be in 10 years' time.
Their vision. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, what's going to happen a bit in the middle? It's like, well, I don't know.
It's the hockey stick.
And you can't necessarily know. Yeah, exactly. It's the underpants gnomes from South Park, right? Like, so I think you can't always know exactly what's going to be there, but you should know, like, at least some of the fundamentals of what the next kind of 6 months should look like.
When you're talking to founders who are interested in terms of stages in going into Techstars as an accelerator, is a lot of people worry about what does good look like at that stage, but also they worry about having to provide over validation, or they have to provide validation to show you that they're already a big thing, and what is that actually? What are you actually expecting to see?
And this is the really tough thing, because no matter how many times I say this to founders, it's like they still don't quite believe me. It's like, what we're investing in typically, right? So, and probably Techstars and a lot of accelerators have changed a little bit over the last few years. 5 years ago, we were mostly investing in pre-product, or prototype stage, or very, very early stage companies. Now it's much easier to spin something up and get kind of your first couple of hundred or a couple of thousand, or couple of users or pounds in revenue. And so actually we've ended up with probably, I don't know, somewhere between 20 and 30% of the companies are now kind of almost pre-Series A. So they've had product market fit. They're maybe coming to Techstars London, as we had from Korea last year with a company called called 42 Brew, they wanted to expand into the UK market. And so for those companies, we're looking at, you know, what's the trajectory, what's the momentum, what are the growth rates, who are the people they're working with, you know, what's the kind of sales cycle, you know, do they understand all of the kind of levers they're going to have to pull to be successful here? For the majority of companies that we invest in that are at that earlier stage, in a lot of cases, there are really no metric. You know, you kind of go, how many people have signed up for your mailing list, or, you know, how many to your website get? I mean, those are kind of, in many cases, vanity metrics and don't really show you anything. So fundamentally, what my job is to do is to invest in the best people, because, you know, probably, I don't know, 20 or 30%, maybe more in some cases, of the companies that come on the program will finish it doing something that's either slightly or radically different to what they started doing the program. And so the kind of atomic unit of what we do here is kind of investing in great people, and then trusting that the combination of the program and the mentors and the network and the kind of workshops and the experience that they will have here will help them get at least a little bit closer, if not nail the thing that they should be doing, or that they, you know, could do to best effect. So it is a tricky thing. Like, I actually, the call that I had just before this was with someone who was saying, okay, what do you need me to show you every week for the next, you know, 10 weeks while we go through the application process? I was like, kind of don't really need you to show me anything. Like, I just need you to stay in touch, and I need to feel that your enthusiasm for what you're building is similar. And yes, of course, if you can increase some of those numbers, you know, whether it be revenue or users or anything else, that's brilliant. But fundamentally, you know, at kind of pre-seed and to even an extent at seed stage, it's all about the people that you invest in. And also, you think about it, like, we have an office here where, you know, 60 people will sit for 13 weeks. You make sure, you know, it's good people that you're dealing with. And in many cases, you know, a lot of these companies, I'm going to be involved with them for 10 or 15 years. Like, it's a material amount of my lifespan that I'm potentially going to dedicate to these companies. So if they're assholes, it becomes, you know, it's not a good outcome.
Yeah. Speaking of assholes, then, like, are there common kind of face palms that you get time and time again that maybe, I don't know, people might not realize that they're making?
I think a lot of it is almost like kind of like micro gestures and kind of microaggressions and all of this type of stuff. So we do the screening issue. So one of the things we're trying to do is go, it's very easy to overcompensate or over-bias towards people who you can meet in person, right? So it's like, I can get a train in London, I can meet this company, and then I talk to someone else on Skype, and it's like, is the connection quite as good there? And we're trying to do more stuff remotely to see if that makes a difference. I'm not sure that it does, but when you talk to people on Skype, it's really interesting. It's like they don't realize that you can actually see them, or it's like they kind of forget for a minute. So when you have CTOs and CEOs, and this is particularly an issue, where you ask a technical question and CTO answers, and then the CEO butts in about 5 seconds in and goes, I think what X is trying to say. It's like, oh my God, this is such a gigantic kind of, or we had a situation a while ago where I was talking to someone, and, you know, one of their salespeople was answering a question. You could see someone else in the background roll their eyes. And it's just like, okay, that's, you don't have to agree with everything, but it's just those little minor things that you see people making mistakes on. I think the other thing is, you know, people who are either falsely arrogant or overly aggressive about things. Like, I think there is a certain, I don't know, archetype that people think they can adhere to, where it's like, you know, they kind of have to walk slightly like Conor McGregor and talk like a character from Silicon Valley, neither of which is particularly kind of endearing, and so you get that a little bit. But then, you know, you never know, those founders could be amazing as well. So, but I think the key thing for us is kind of, ultimately, because it's a people business, what you want to see is people who interact really well with one another, and people who you feel like if we put them in an environment where they're going to meet 100 mentors that we've brought in, and they're going to spend time with 9 other companies, and they're going to meet a bunch of investors that we try and connect them to, you know, fundamentally we have to make sure that they're the right people, and that, you know, the other big thing for us is that they're coachable. If you're applying to do a program like this, at a bare minimum, you should be kind of open to suggestions on how to change or iterate or you know, make improvements. And so we do meet a lot of people who kind of go, well, I don't really need the program, I'm just doing it to get this, you know, tick on my resume type of thing. So that's obviously a bit of and the other big one is and this is probably slightly more true for any stage of investment, is you do meet a lot of people who literally have no idea what they're, like, why they're applying, or what Techstars London is, or what Techstars anything is. So it's, I would always, and I say it to the companies who go through the program, or any company I've ever invested, like, if you're going to go and meet a VC or an investor, like, spend, even if it's a minute, just look at their LinkedIn profile, or look at them on Crunchbase, or and, like, just see the shit that they're interested in, and at the very minimum go, oh, I saw you did X, or go, I don't need to have a meeting with this person because they don't invest in whatever, medtech or whatever.
Sure.
So yeah.
Do you get a lot of people that, like, throw blockchain onto something and kind of expect that to talk for itself? I get that a lot in terms of, oh yeah, we're doing Airbnb, but with blockchain.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those interviews are always really interesting, because then you go, well, why?
Why? Yeah. What is the technical benefit of it?
Decentralized. Well, yeah, but why?
Yeah.
You have to adopt the kind of persona of a 2 or 3 year old child in a lot of those. You just go, and eventually you kind of peel back, and it's like, oh well, we thought it sounded good. Exactly. In some cases, look, applying blockchain to things is really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What we see a lot is, it's almost like a compounding effect, where it's like, okay, you can stick one buzzword in, right? So it's like, oh,
AI and machine learning.
I can't tell you how many AI recruiting platforms I see on an ongoing basis, and you go, okay, well, where's the AI in this? It's like, oh well, it's varying different degrees of saying that secretly it's actually just people looking at profiles. So we meet a lot of that, but it's then when they go, it's AI for recruiting on the blockchain.
Yes.
Or APR, or something like this.
Guys,
like, oh
you're
my God, the multiplier effect. And you then also, one of the challenges for me is kind of going, at some point, maybe someone actually will build, will build an AI for, recruiting in VR that's also on the blockchain, that works with only people in synthetic biology.
Your space program, yeah.
And I'm going to go, no, because it's actually going to be $1 billion company. But then, that's life. Like, we're probably going to miss as many as we hit.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting though. So just finally, in terms of you touched on it earlier, but the places or the things that Techstars are doing for populations that are kind of outside the norm, or the or who are underrepresented in the kind of tech sphere, whether it's geographical or a demographic or others, what are the kinds of things that people should be looking out for that maybe they haven't heard about?
Yeah, we did a startup, actually, just this last weekend. We did a startup weekend all around kind of immigration and immigrants in Ireland, in Dublin, which was all about trying to get kind of members of that community together to kind of talk about ideas that they could work on, and solutions that were maybe applicable for people who were in either refugee status or any other type of immigrant. We launched a program in the US about 1.5 years ago called Techstars Anywhere. So one of the things that we ask people to do is, if you do Techstars London or Techstars New York or somewhere else, you come and you work out of our office for 3 months, right? So there's mentors, everything happens here. It's a kind of busy time. And one of the things we realize is there are a huge swathe of the population who have young children or elderly parents, or who have disabilities, or who just can't up sticks and kind of move for 6 months. So we've piloted that program in the US, and I think it's been a real success. So I think we'll look at doing a little bit more like that over time. We're looking at more in the kind of education space. So we just we signed a deal with the city of Buffalo, and we're doing some work in Kentucky and a couple of other places with both kind of national level governments and also kind of municipality and city level governments, to try and encourage kind of more entrepreneurship and ecosystem. So the Startup Week in Bilbao is a great example of that. Like that community is very nascent and very small. And so the more that we can kind of collaborate with people there to kind of grow the awareness of what's happening, and grow the awareness of this as a kind of career choice, for want of a better description, or working in startups as a career choice rather than necessarily entrepreneurship. I think that's going to be kind of a big focus for us. And we've just started doing bits and pieces in Asia, comparatively recently. So our view is that, as I said, kind of ideas come from everywhere, great companies come from everywhere. And so I think a lot of what you'll see over the next little while is how we start interacting with non-European and non-US ecosystems, or certainly non-Northern American ecosystems, to engage with people at that very early stage of Startup Weekend and Startup Week, right the way through to how we support with education and resources, and then, potentially investment over time. Because I think if you look at what, Steve Case has been doing with kind of Rise of the Rest in the US, kind of saying, look, a whole bunch of stuff is happening in between, San Francisco, LA, and New York. The same is also true in Europe. The same is also true in Asia. Like, some of the best companies in Asia are coming out of Vietnam. They're coming out of Indonesia. There's amazing stuff happening in Bangladesh. You look at Kenya, Ghana, all of these markets in Africa, Egypt and Jordan and others in the Middle East. So one of the challenges is, for a lot of investors, it's difficult for them to invest in markets that they don't fully understand, or maybe they don't have a footprint in. So I think there's a bit of work to be done on the entrepreneurial side. I also think, and it's not just us, I think it's a lot of people, need to kind of start thinking a little bit more about how we can help a lot of these kind of emerging markets develop a more efficient flow of capital, whether it be, angels or early stage VCs or accelerators or others. So, we're bullish on being the worldwide network. So I think you'll see a lot more of that over the next little while.
Yeah, and I'm also, of course, you have Techstars Foundation as well that doing some interesting stuff. So, yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much for taking the time and for spending it talking to me.
Happy to chat. Thank you for having me.
Alrighty, take care.